silly, but we are delighted to support this bill. Thank you, Mr Speaker.
I call the honourable member Gareth Hughes. Tanakwe, Mr Hughes.
Kia ora, Mr Speaker. Ngā mihi nui kia koutou kia ora. I rise to support this bill. The Green Party supports greater marine protection. We think this is an absolutely stunning, beautiful part of the country. Mr Speaker, seeing those seals, the other marine life, that trench of one of only 100 such deep marine sites in the world. This is a beautiful part of our beautiful country. It's somewhere where many New Zealanders love. They go camping, they go surfing, they go there to check out the marine life. I think every New Zealander's got their own story about their favourite part of New Zealand, but I wouldn't be surprised if this coast, the Kaikoura coast, was the top of many Kiwis' list. It's also a good example of the clean, green economy. We call it the smart green economy, which is built on enhancing, taking advantage of our natural beauty, protecting it so we've got a sustainable income into the future, not this drill it, mine it, frack it approach to our natural environment we see from the government so often. What you can see in the officials' advice to the government is that marine tourism is a huge earner for this country, bringing in more than $1.6 billion, and more than 500 million international tourists took part in some sort of marine conservation or marine tourism activity. So it's a fantastic, smart, green economic sector. With the fourth largest EEZ in the world, exclusive economic zone, this is a real area where you could see new jobs, new prosperity, a richer New Zealand as a result. So we're supporting marine protection. That's why we're supporting this legislation today. We'd like to acknowledge it, the Minister, Nick Smith. We'd like to acknowledge and thank all the hard work of all the people involved over so many years in the Te Korawai process, the local iwi, Ngāti Kuri, obviously Ngāi Tahu, and everyone involved. Now the government sort of, of course this is election year, they're trying to pretend like this is something they've come up with and they're acting on, but I really do want to say that over many, many years, people have been... Well, Mr Speaker, if Maggie Barry is going to sit there and slag off from the backbenches about this, Mr Speaker, she in fact is backing up my point, which is this has been something developed from the community for many, many years, longer than this government in fact, so it is unfair for this government and the member Maggie Barry...
Order. I'm sorry to interrupt the honourable member. Can I just say to members in close proximity to each other, and I go back to Sir Basil after 1984 on this ruling, when you have close proximity, it muffles the microphone, it makes it so much more difficult for the person trying to address the House. And can I just remind the House that courtesy is contagious. I call the honourable member Gareth Hughes.
Thank you, Mr Speaker, and it is quite unbecoming as well. Mr Speaker, so I'm making the point, people have been working very hard over a number of years and we'd like to thank them, acknowledge them, and I think the collaborative process, we could see more successes like these in the future. So we know the bill does a number of things, including a new marine reserve, the Hikarangi Marine Reserve, a new whale sanctuary, a new fair seal sanctuary, Matatai and Taipuri, and some regulations when it comes to fishing. So it looks like a big package, but Mr Speaker, what I want to do is go into each element of this bill, provide a bit of context, a bit of analysis, and then look at the motivations behind it, but more importantly, look at the government's track record when it comes to marine conservation, because there very much is an agenda behind this legislation we see today. So, Mr Speaker, first up I want to look at the Marine Reserve, because this is what the Minister, Nick Smith, has been trumpeted. He says it's the largest marine reserve to touch mainland New Zealand, and while that's the case in a strict measurable sense in terms of being just slightly larger than 10,000 hectares, 104 square kilometres, it's important to point out. Now, people watching this on the telly or listening on the radio obviously can't see the maps which is provided in the legislation. What this marine reserve does is has a tiny little bit on land, 1.95 kilometres, a tiny bit on land, and then extends out into the waters over the trench. Now, we're not opposed to protecting trenches, but we just think if you're going to be talking about making the largest marine reserve that touches land, you wouldn't have this almost triangle shape with the smallest point touching land, we think there's a bit of misadvertising there. What we'd like to see is greater marine reserves over our beaches, over our rocky shores, so that people can enjoy the biodiversity and the protection benefits that marine reserves provide. We'd note that there's very limited fishing in this area, and we'd note again the size, 104 square kilometres. Now the government's making out that this is a huge deal, but 104 square kilometres. Now, Mr. Speaker, last year the government offered oil blocks to the oil industry 4,000 times larger. So let's put them in contrast. 104 square kilometres of new protections, yet 4,000 times more oil blocks were offered in a single year. Here you can see the government's priority. Now, the government's again making out this is a huge marine reserve, and we need some big marine reserves. Less than half of 1%, 0.41% of our EEZ and territorial sea is protected in marine reserves. We know Colmar Brunson surveyed New Zealanders and found they assumed we had around 30% protected. No, the truth is 0.41%. So what does this new reserve take the total from 0.41% to 0.41%. The size is that small in the global picture that it only moves a couple of decimal points. Mr. Speaker, when it comes to the whale sanctuary, we'd like to see greater protections for our whales and marine mammals in New Zealand. We've got 55 Maoris dolphins left, nationally critically endangered New Zealand sea lions. The Hector's dolphins just around the corner from this area, a bit south, again, are critically endangered. So the whale sanctuary sounds like a great idea, doesn't it? But, Mr. Speaker, when you read the legislation and the associated documents, you've got to question yourself, what's the purpose of the whale sanctuary? All this whale sanctuary does is make voluntary seismic surveying for oil and gas activities, which are currently voluntary, including the entire EEZ, apply in this area. Mr. Speaker, this whale sanctuary doesn't provide much sanctuary if that's the only thing it does. If all it does is still allow seismic surveying, but the very weak and permissive voluntary code of conduct should have applied. Basically, to sum up the code of conduct, you need a couple of people on your ship having a look out if they can see any dolphins or whales. This is far from best practice for a marine country that depends on our economy, that derives much of our income from whale watching and other tourism. I think this is almost laughable, Mr. Speaker. But I guess the biggest threat facing this area, which was graphically highlighted by the locals, is while the government gives on this hand, on the other hand, they're massively endangering this beautiful part of the country with their risky deep-sea drilling agenda. Now, I'd like to thank the work of Ngāti Kuri. I wasn't at the Blue Greens conference. Surprise, surprise, I didn't get an invitation. But what we saw was, in fact, more people outside the conference protesting this government's agenda than were there inside, despite being part of this collaborative process. So the government describes this as the next frontier, the oceans. But Mr. Speaker, I think what they mean is the next frontier for extraction. Because while there's this new marine reserve, which is great and we support, we've got to put it in contrast with all the oil and gas permits they've offered. You know, the government literally funding Trans-Tasman Resources $12 to $25 million to literally suck up 50 million tonnes per annum of Taranaki Whanganui seabed. Mr. Speaker, it's still frankly ridiculous that we need legislation of Parliament to get marine reserves passed, because this party sat on its hands for the years it's been in government and haven't updated our marine reserves law, our antiquated 1971 Act. They're still missing their targets. Now, 2 ministers have missed their target, Wilkinson and Smith, and we still don't have modern marine reserves law. Now, while they're seeing new marine reserves created, let's not forget this government had to be taken to court by the people of the Akaroa community to get that marine reserve created. This government won't protect all of the waters around the World Heritage listed sub-Antarctic islands. They're still not acting what the scientists urge us to do to protect the Maoris dolphins. The New Zealand sea lions are still being caught in those lethal indiscriminate fishing nets, including earlier this year, yet the government's not requiring we go to sea lion safe fishing techniques. We're seeing them granting minerals exploration and mining permits in benthic protected areas, areas. We're only seeing less than half of 1% of our marine reserves protected, and a gigantic part of our oceans open to oil drilling. Mr. Speaker, what the Greens and government would do is take this seriously. This is the smarter, greener economy. We would modernise our marine reserves law. We would undertake spatial planning in that EEZ, protecting a great, vast area, more than national. We would include protection of the Kermadec, overnight taking New Zealand from 0.41% to 15% of our waters protected. Mr. Speaker, we would act with the urgency and the haste that scientists say we must if we want to give the Maoris a shot at survival. We will protect the New Zealand sea line. Mr. Speaker, when it comes to protecting the marine environment that us Kiwis love, it's the Green Party's the champions, not this party with a lick of greenwash. When you look at their track record, they're not the champions of the marine environment.
The Honourable Phil Heatley.
Speaker, I too